So we've talked about it many times already. The first step in doing a marketing plan is, of course, a situation analysis. To perform a situation analysis, there is the use of primary and secondary data. The number one skill to do a good situation analysis is the ability to determine what information is needed and where you can find it. You're going to need information on the industry. You're going to need internal information, and in many cases that can be done using internal records or public information that is easily found online. You want to know something about the customers, and so you're going to need customer information. Some of that is internal, some of that customer information is more general, and there are places that we will show you that you might be able to find that information. You're going to need to know about the competitors. And then, of course, you're going to need to know about the macro environment that might influence that marketing plan over time. Yes, this is a time-consuming task and it's hard work, but it certainly is well worth the effort and is an absolute necessity to become a skilled marketing planner. There is no longer anybody who is going to be successful with hunches or anecdotal evidence. Now, anecdotal evidence is probably the most dangerous. Let me give you an example. Many years ago when I was consulting with the sports marketing people at the Thomas & Mack, we used to go to meetings, and at the meeting, we had this young lady who used to come in and say things like, I was talking to some of the boosters at the halftime get-together, and they complained about the food. So I think we should change the food. And of course, our responses were always, well, how many people did you talk to, and what did they say? And she would say, well, it was more than one, and they said that the food was cold and it wasn't good food, and that we need to change it. So they would change the food. Probably my most famous example is we were sitting in a meeting one time at the Thomas & Mack, and this was back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and the basketball games always started at 8 o'clock unless they were on the late game on ESPN, and then they would start at 9 o'clock. And that seemed relatively late to me. So we were in a meeting one day, and a friend of mine and myself asked the people in sports marketing, why do we have 8 o'clock games? The same young lady, who I just mentioned previously, said, we have 8 o'clock games because that's what our season ticket holders and especially our donors want. And of course, my response was, really? Well, how do we know that? She said, well, they're all casino workers and they need to have time to get off work at the casino, to go home and have dinner, and to get everybody ready and to get to the games. So we really can't start the games before 8 o'clock. My response was, really? And so I suggested that perhaps we survey our season ticket holders and especially our scholarship donor season ticket holders. And sure enough, when we surveyed them, it turned out that they wanted the games much earlier. Many of our scholarship donors for UNLV athletics are older, and the ones that are a little bit younger have children, and both groups wanted the games earlier. The senior citizens, who are some of our biggest donors, wanted the games at 6 o'clock. And then, of course, others wanted the games at 6:30, 7, and 7:30. So when we added all the data together, it turned out that 75% of our scholarship donors wanted the games at 7 o'clock. So, of course, then we finally moved the games to 7 o'clock and made everybody happier. We would still be having 8 o'clock games today had we accepted the anecdotal evidence provided by this young lady. And of course, the problem with anecdotal evidence is that you tend to hear what you want to hear, and you tend to listen to the squeaky wheels, and you tend to listen to those people who are doing the most complaining, and you do not listen to the people who are most important to you, the scholarship donor season ticket holders. Same issue comes up when we talk about focus groups. One of the local casinos went bankrupt a few years ago, and part of the reason for that, not all of it, but part of the reason for that was that they typically relied on focus group data. Now, focus groups in marketing research have a role. The role that they have is to provide us with some basic understanding and framing of what questions we should ask when we survey our audience. Using focus group data and pretending that it is representative of the whole population of your customers is always a bad idea and should never be done. So you can use focus groups to get an idea as to how to frame questions and what questions should be asked and what alternatives we might have in terms of asking questions. But you should not be making decisions solely based on focus group data. Most marketing researchers rely much more heavily on secondary data, and with all of the new analytics and data sources that are available on the web, I believe that secondary data has become a much more important tool for marketing researchers than primary data. But we'll talk a little bit about each. Now, the reason that I talk about secondary data a lot more than primary data is that secondary data is almost always less expensive. My argument is that you should only collect primary data when it's absolutely necessary. Always see what secondary is available first. Because if secondary data is available, it will be less expensive and is likely to be relatively accurate. When you need primary data, go ahead and collect it, but always use qualified survey experts. There are plenty of individuals and firms that go around marketing themselves as survey data experts, and they simply are not. They are not qualified or adequately trained to collect and analyze primary data. Collecting this data in-house because you bought some Survey Monkey software is perhaps the worst possible decision. I have seen more and more surveys done by companies using their marketing departments because they have survey data software available. Always use people who are well trained in market survey research. I'm one of those people that was lucky enough to be trained at the University of Wisconsin at Madison when we had perhaps the finest research faculty in the country. It is the home of Nielsen's Data Research Center, and of course we were all well trained in how to collect and analyze survey research. Here's an example of a survey that we did a while ago for a concert series that was being done at the Orleans Arena. And you'll notice that these are typically the way that these questions tend to look. Your satisfaction with parking, cleanliness, sound levels, those sorts of things. You'll notice in here that we try not to have any open-ended questions that are going to be hard to analyze. And we always ask questions that are straightforward and direct, and that the responder to the survey can easily understand and answer. Now here's a survey that I got last year from the Golden Knights, and it's an interesting survey, and it asks a number of different questions, and it if you take a quick look at it, it looks a little like the survey I just showed you on the previous page, but trust me, it is not. Here's the second page to this. In summary, it still surprises me when I see a big company, in this case of people like the Golden Knights, distributing bad surveys and then planning to rely on the information or misinformation that they provide to make decisions. Designing, distributing, collecting data, and analyzing results from a survey is a job for real professionals, not someone that went to a one-day seminar on building surveys and who owns a copy of SurveyMonkey. And of course, making decisions based on that information is another skill set that needs to be learned. In the next couple of sessions, we'll be talking about some of the secondary data that is readily available that you ought to think about using as a sports marketer and you ought to be aware of.